Jay, and I want to welcome you to the Union Cemetery for the 2021 Graveyard Walk. We're here tonight and we honor 5 families sharing their stories. And this is where the tour will start this year, at the grave of Alonzo Fuller. Alonzo died in 1879 at age 32 years, and we can see from the symbol down here that Alonzo was a veteran from 86. So, you are about to take a walk through time and meet some distinguished residents of Union Cemetery. They're anxious to share their stories with you. If you're coming to the cemetery in person, please be mindful that the graveyard is a sacred place where beloved ancestors rest. I think they like that we're here to see them, but please step carefully and respect the graves, headstones, and gifts left by family members. Some of the stones are leaning or cracking, so please don't climb or push on them. And let's begin our tour and come right this way. Alonzo here was a Civil War soldier. There are many symbols throughout the cemetery identifying veterans from different wars. Please try to notice them as you walk through. Over here, you can find the stone of the Eldridge family. Many of the characters, people that are buried there at the Eldridge stone, are the characters from a book written by Glenn Pearsall called Leaves Torn Asunder. And it's a story of the town of Johnsburg in the Civil War, and it's based on real people who lived here and are buried here and in other cemeteries. Let's walk up to the graves of William G. and Judah Waldron, who were born in the late 1700s and were among the first settlers of the town of Johnsburg when the roads were little more than paths and the town a small settlement in the wilderness. To give some perspective, William was born in 1783, and George Washington was general of the Continental Army from 1775 to 1783, the year William was born. If we look over here, there's a newly placed marker for William and Judah. And William and Judah are surrounded here by many family members who married and settled in the town of Johnsburg. Gloria Waldron Huckle is our visiting author this year, is descended from this couple. Her series of books shares the story of the Waldrons back to their roots in the Netherlands in the 1700s. And speaking of the Waldron family, here is one of their descendants, our first stop on tonight's tour. Good evening, Mr. Waldron.
Greetings. It's good to see everybody here out in the old Union Cemetery. And it really is good to see you. And a good day to you all. I am John D. Waldron, the son of Daniel and Asenna Waldron. As you see, I appear here today with my soldier's cap. When I was 19 years old, that would be September of 1864, I enlisted in Company D, 175th Regiment of the New York Infantry Volunteers. I was eager to do my part in what we called the War of the Great Rebellion. My pa understood, but my mom, not so much. She wept something terrible, saying I was the only one of their children who made her laugh. I was a silly boy, I reckon. Well, my mom needed not to worry so. The Lord took care of me and returned me home safely the following year in June of 1865. 2 years later, I married Nanny McCarty, a handsome-looking woman. Oh my gosh, those big eyes, and she was put together just the way a woman ought to be. Your There she is. Together we had a large family, and though we had some hard times, all in all, our life together was a good one. I worked hard on and off our farm. During my lifetime, I was employed as a stonemason, and I helped to build some of the homes in this area. I lived hereabouts all my life, and when I left this earth in 1937, I was given a fine send-off. Yes, sir. Let me read you what they said about me in the newspaper. North Creek. John D. Waldron, 92, the last Civil War veteran in the town of Johnsburg, died Wednesday night at his home here after a few days' illness following a stroke of paralysis. He is survived by 4 children: Mrs. Byron Herbert of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, Mrs. Mame Carter of Portland, Oregon, Darius Waldron of Racket Lake, James Waldron of North Creek, 13 grandchildren, several nieces, and 1 great-grandchild in Oregon. The Reverend W.R. Rogers of the First Baptist Church officiated, and the members of the American Legion Post 629 conducted a service right here at my grave. You know, the American Legion Post here in town was established in 1928. They are a great group of fellows that began Post 629, and I hear the post still keeps on even today. So, I thank you all for dropping by today. It's been good remembering. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waldron, and we thank you for your service. Let's follow the path over this way. Have a good night. We're going to go up through the middle of the cemetery now to have a visit with the Waddell family. Hello, Spirit.
Good evening. Good evening. Let me introduce you to the Waddell family. Their story is really the story of the town of Johnsburg, and their family includes many names that we will recognize today: Eldridge, Rob Lee, Waldron, and Noxon. Any number of people can claim a connection to the Waddells, just like every cat in North Creek can claim a connection to the Waddell feed store cats. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's start in 1752 with Robert Waddell in Durham, England.
Hello, my name is Robert Waddell. I was one of the first settlers in this community. We called it Elm Hill, but I guess you folks today refer to it as the Hamlet of Johnsburg. Yes, I'm originally from England, County Durham, Northumberland, just south of the Scottish border country. And it was there at age 25, I married the love of my life, Jane Swinston. And we had 2 children, Elizabeth and John, but Jane died 3 years later. And it was tough raising those youngins. Just me and some help with the family. We thought about going to America back then, but the colonies, they were revolting. They wanted their independence. It was not a good time to travel. So we stayed in County Durham for 13 years, but we finally came to America. We landed on a wharf at the seaport of New York. And it was on a wharf there that I met this fellow called John Thurman. He was quite a character. Everybody getting off the boat, he would grab him and tell him about all his land in the northern wilderness and how the barley grain was as big as beech nuts. We all laughed at that. We knew he was exaggerating, but we admired his enthusiasm. And before we knowed it, we were heading up north, me and the children, and we arrived at Elm Hill in 1793. And Mr. Thurman, I always called him Mr. Thurman. Mr. Thurman, he put me to work because I could write and do figures. He put me in charge of the dry goods store. And then when he went down to New York City, I would take care of his land grants and act as his land agent. And it was at Elm Hill that I met 26-year-old Nancy Hodgson. And I courted her, and we married. And Mr. Thurman, he kept saying, for this community to grow, we need more people. Well, Nancy and I tried to do our part. We had 10 children. Our eldest was Mary. We always called her Polly, and she was the first white child born in this neighborhood.
Well, Robert died when he was 72 years old, and he's buried in Johnsburg, where all the earliest settlers from our area are buried. Now, Nancy is buried in Pottersville, but their sixth child was a son named Hugh. And Hugh really starts the community building. He starts the legacy that the Waddells will follow. Hugh, like his father, farms, he cuts lumber, and then he marries Susan Eveline Waldron, and they have 4 children. And in 1854, Hugh is elected town supervisor. Now, the Waddells were interested in more than local politics, because in 1865, Susan and Hugh's 2 sons, Robert and William, build a 2-story white building. It will be the first store in Weavertown. 2-story, elegant white building with a big bay window. And in 1865, right after they opened the store, Robert, like his father, is elected town supervisor.
Greetings. How's everybody tonight? I hope you all voted in the last election. Hopefully you voted for me. My name's William Waddell, and I was town supervisor during the War of the Great Rebellion. You folks today call it the Civil War. Now, the War of the Great Rebellion, those were tough times. But the boys from Johnsburg, they rallied around the flag. We filled our enlistment quotas right away. In fact, some of the local boys, the Wadron fellas, went all the way up to Plattsburgh to enlist because our rolls were full. Interesting time, the war, and it was tough being supervisor. In 1864, in the midst of the war, I was actually elected chairman of the Warren County Board of Supervisors. 10 years later, I served 2 terms in the New York State Assembly. But what I'm most known for is the big house in Weavertown. So we always called it the big house. It was 1865, the last year of the war, and we built with Will the general store. And then Electa and I lived upstairs when in 1870 we built the big house. Now, Electa, and don't ever call her Electra. I made that mistake once. Electa, she says I'm a politician and I talk too much. So she wrote down what I'm supposed to be saying tonight. So, ma'am, if you'd hold my cane, I gotta get my spectacles on.
Every politician needs spectacles.
Yeah, it looks more dignified, I think.
Absolutely.
So this is what Electa told me to say. Electa and I had 4 children. She was my second wife, Mary having died just 4 years after marriage. Electa was a strong-willed lady, a successful businesswoman in her own right. She was the one who bought 12 acres adjacent to the store from her mother, Susan Robley. And it was on that property that we built a large, elegant house inspired by one she had seen in Albany. The family always referred to it as the big house. We moved in with our 4 children, Electa's mother and brother, and 2 boarders.
Well, Robert died at the age of 45 of typhoid fever. And he had only lived with Electa in the house for 8 years. He too was buried in Johnsburg with the earliest settlers. However, Electa remarried a Sheffield, and she's quite close. Well, the general store lasted for another 150 years until it burned to the ground in 2018. But the big house still stands, passed down through the generations through the women in the family. Wouldn't they be pleased to know that their home will be the house that will hold the history of the town of Johnsburg, because the Johnsburg Historical Society will be moving into their home, and I just know that they would be quite pleased. Well, the next generation will be Robert and Electa's oldest son, William R., and he will continue community building, but this time in North Creek.
Howdy, I'm William R. Waddell. I thought I heard folks out here. I was out back with the horses. I, along with my brother Lee and sisters Susan and Rose, we lived in the big house. And sadly, Sister Rose died at age 20. She's buried just over there. I married Laura Washburn, who rests here beside me. This is my headstone over here. Laura died in 1906, the year I served in the New York State Assembly. It seems serving in the State Assembly was somewhat of a family tradition. On Laura's death, I courted and married Lulu Montgomery. My other sister, Susan, married in Eldridge, and they lived in the big house in Weavertown. They're buried only a few hundred feet away. I seem destined to carry on the Waddell merchant tradition as well. In 1901, I bought property and buildings near the North Creek train depot, originally owned by Thomas Durant, the rich businessman, some say swindler, who brought the railroad to North Creek. I built a 2-story large building right near the train tracks, which is where I housed a store on the first floor, living quarters on the second floor. If you go down to the depot, you'll see my name still on the side of that large barn. Years ago, a 100-pound bag of sugar sold for only $5.20. What do you folks pay these days? I also built a stable for horses and storage for grain and feed for the stagecoach line I started. I called it the Red Ball line because the freight wagons were red with yellow wheels. I owned stagecoaches and took passengers from the North Creek train depot to Indian Lake and Blue Mountain. Many of the passengers were guests of Dr. Durant's son, William, who was speculating in land up there in the great northern wilderness, as we always called it. And we had some highfalutin guests come up on our stages, including members of the Vanderbilt family. I received a great deal of notoriety when the stage was robbed in 1901, robbed just above North River. We had heard rumors about a planned robbery, so the day before, we shipped out the payroll for the men working out of the Indian Lake Dam. The thieves, when they robbed the stagecoach, got little more than a few watches and women's jewelry. But what most distressed me, and I'm still upset about it to this day, is they shot the lead horse. Now, that was a mare I had just brought in 2 weeks earlier, all the way from Chicago. I was also a partner in the Riverside Screw Lake stage line, the one that they call the Tally-Ho line. And I owned a slaughterhouse and situated where the nursing home is today. I was elected to the New York State Legislature from 1905 to 1909, was a founding member of the North Creek Bank. It's located on Main Street. The old bank houses today a wonderful little store next to a cute little restaurant, Barvino.
Well, I'm sure William R. would be pleased to know that one of his stages went to Frontier Town and provided wonderful rides for kids. Another one of his stages went to Blue Mountain Lake and is on display at the museum. And I'm sure he would chuckle, knowing how enthralled visitors to the North Creek Train Depot, now a popular museum, and how enthralled they are at all the stories that we tell about his stage line. But probably he would be proudest that people in town still remember his two sons, Robert, better known as Bob, and Leroy, that we all called Roy. Well, Bob was an outdoor man, and Bob was a member of the North Creek Beagle Club. Did you know the Patch Beagle was bred here in North Creek? Well, the club met at the Straight House and Tap Room, and that was located where the bank is today. And it was there until it burned to the ground one cold winter day and took the Methodist parsonage next door with it. And I can tell you, the Methodists weren't very pleased. Well, anyway, his brother Roy had met his wife Mabel at the Straight House. And Roy and Mabel got married, and they had 3 children, Bill, Helen, and Irene. And by that time, the use of horses in the Adirondacks was fading, and they were being replaced with automation, with all kinds of cars, with trucks. But there was still a need for feed, animal feed. So Roy and Mabel converted one of the buildings on the old Durant property to a feed store. Well, that's where the cats come in, good mousers all. Well, after a while, their son Bill took over the business, and he was also the Coca-Cola distributor in upstate New York. And after a while, Bill met his wife, the vivacious Grace, at that fine eating establishment and social center on Main Street, the Red Diner. Well, you thought everybody met at Ridings? All right. Well, anyway, now you know the story of the Waddells, including the cats and dogs. And if you would like to visit them, I'm sure their spirits are still roaming down in Weavertown at their big house, or in North Creek around the house, the town that they built. And we bid you a good evening.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to visit that house in Weavertown. What do you think? Let's come this way. We'll follow the path of solar lights. And we're going to head right over to Holcomb Street. And we'll go up the street to the top of the cemetery. Watch your step in through here. It's a little uneven. The solar lights will lead the way. Here we are at the top of the cemetery. We'll climb up this little hill. Over here on my right, by this flag, are the graves of Mildred and Arthur Prescott. And they lived here in the early days of skiing and ran Prescott's jewelry store, which was then sold to the Cobb family. Here we are. We're going to make a turn right by Calvin Robley and Adelaide Robley. We just passed the grave of the Prescotts, and we were saying that they used to own the jewelry and watch repair shop in town. So now we're going to follow the path of solar lights at the top of the cemetery. And we're making our way down to Howard and Bertha Kenyon. Last year on our virtual tour, we talked with Howard. This year, Bertha Kenyon is here to share her story with us. Hello, Mrs. Kenyon. Hello.
I'm Bertha Kenyon. I was born here in North Creek on September 15, 1877, to Hiram and Lovina Jackson Hewitt, and grew up right here in Holcombville. I had 2 older sisters, Lily and Ida, and a brother, Arthur. They all died before me. I lived to be 84 years old. My father was born in Walworth, Wayne County, New York, and my mother was born in Fort Anne, Washington County, New York. My father's family moved here before 1840. At about age 18, Father left home. Father and Mother were married about 1859 and lived in the town of Monroe in 1860. They moved to Johnsburg between 1860 and 1865. Father was listed as a farmer in the 1865 New York State Census. Their house was log, and there was a lumber shanty where workers stayed. The workers were listed with my father's family as boarders. This was 12 years before I was born. As time went on, they must have been doing fine financially because they had an employee, Jennifer Tripp, who eventually came to live with my husband and me. My parents and my mother's parents and other family members are buried here in Union. In 1896, when I was 17, our little hamlet had the North Creek Dramatic Club. That year we produced 2 plays and performed them in Red Man's Hall above the Teakle Drug Store. In Tony the Convict, I played Sally, and Howard Kenyon, 11 years older than me, played Philip Warburton. In The Woven Web, I played Louise Falconer, and Howard played Walter Hastings, a young lawyer. This is where Howard and I got to know each other. He didn't tell you about these plays last year when you met him here. Must have slipped his mind. On December 14th, 1902, Howard and I were married. I was 25 and Howard was 36 by then. Howard and I had a good life together, married 31 years, until his death in January 1933. Together we ran our businesses, the clothing store and the lumber store. We dealt in real estate, participated in various groups, and even got away to our hunting camp on the Boreas River. Howard was busy with the town, the bank, the North Creek Fire District, the Red Men, the Masons, and the Oddfellows. Oh yes, he was postmaster for 5 years. I was involved with the Methodist Church Ladies Group, the Red Cross, and the Rebeccas. My parents were hard-working and community-minded and instilled a sense of civic duty in me. The onset of World War I brought needs for our soldiers overseas, and our little community responded. In 1917, we contributed to the News Tobacco Fund, which provided smokes to soldiers. That would be unthinkable today. In 1918, the local Red Cross shipped needed clothing and supplies to our military in France. Many of us contributed to this. This was also the year of the Spanish flu. I don't think it affected us here much. At least I don't remember it. Howard and I were busy during the 1920s, building our businesses and enjoying our success. Then, in the 1930s, Howard's health began to fail. He had kidney problems. On December 1st, 1932, he entered St. Peter's Hospital in Albany. And on January 7th, 1933, after surgery, he died. He was 67. A Masonic funeral service was held for him and was well attended. My life changed forever. After 31 years married, I was a widow and only 56. I inherited his business holdings, which included the lumber store. I eventually sold this to Bill Shields, our friend and business acquaintance. I kept our clothing store and turned it into a retail department store, as noted in the 1940 census. In the years after Howard's death, I stayed involved in the town, but also took some funds to buy a new DeSoto coupe in 1934. My camp at Oven Mountain Pond brought some rest when needed. I enjoyed visits from my family and friends and trips to visit them. My niece Parthenia Whitaker was often my companion. We spent many hours together until her death in March of 1955. I missed her. I was 75 years old. My brother Arthur's son, Charles Hewitt, spent some summers with Howard and me. We lost touch as time went on. My store was a place to buy clothing and fabric and all kinds of bright-colored embroidery, thread, personal items, and more. The neighborhood kids would stop by, especially Tom Butler. I liked him and gave him a book one time entitled The Nature I Love by Bill Geoghegan. Tom and Bill actually shared correspondence. Throughout the years, I allowed my store to be the place where the Methodist Church and the Wisteria Rebecca Lodge to hold food sales. It was a pickup place for chest x-ray cards, signifying the intention to have a chest x-ray that were to be returned to the North Creek High School. I was a collection point for used sunglasses that Johnsburg Grange collected, for the distribution of new glasses and artificial eyes for the needy, and other causes. There were also tetanus, toxoid, and vaccination clinics held in town. My building also had rooms that I rented out. I was proud to be a member of the Red Cross and a donor to the War Chest and to buy war bonds during the World War II years. These were exciting, terrifying, and sad days. June 6, 1945, brought news of me attending the memorial service of Private First Class Harold W. Chapman, whose mother was the former Carrie Aldrich of North Creek. His father was John Chapman of Fort Edward. In the early 1950s, the Korean War went on. Again, the town contributed. I saw 3 wars in my lifetime, and so many of our local men leave for the military. Some did not come back, and others came back, but were never the same. I am so thankful for every one of them. When I died on March 1st, 1962, at the age of 84, Phil Brazel took care of my estate. My nephew Charles had not been heard from in a long time, and it wasn't known whether he was dead or alive. He had to be looked for. Phil finally got it all settled. If you remember Phil, you will know what a good attorney and friend he was. My birthday is September 15th. That's next Wednesday. And I will be 144 years old. I'm so glad to have been able to share my story with you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mrs. Kenyon. Please rest in peace with your dear Howard. Good night. All right, let's move on to our next stop, right along the path to the cemetery. about to see the mausoleum that stands at the very top of the cemetery here at the Union. This is where Mary Persons is at rest. Mary referred to herself by a different name, Melissa Ordway, and her story is often spoken in hushed tones by members of the family, or not at all. I don't believe Melissa is with us tonight. Perhaps she's gone to visit her lover, buried in another cemetery in Glens Falls. It is said on certain nights, you can hear Melissa laughing down at the town that shunned her, or smell her cigar. Her story will be told again on another night at another time. Good night, Melissa. As I look around the cemetery tonight, I see lots of flags that mark the graves of our veterans, and I believe that all those flags were placed by Sharon and Ken Hammond. We'll talk a little bit more about them in a little while as we end our tour. Let's come down this path to the road at the top of the cemetery, and we'll turn right. It is a beautiful night. It's a very peaceful place here at the Union Cemetery. Just past the Woodwards, here we see the family of Dr. Glenn. Good evening.
Hello, folks. I am Dr. James Glenn Jr. I've come here to chat with you for a while and maybe see how things have changed since I was last here. I was born in Albany on July 2nd, 1907, and grew up in that area with my parents, James and Bessie Glenn, and my brothers, Robert and Donald. Our father was a professional photographer in the Albany area. After I graduated from high school, I went to Union College for pre-med, then continued my education, getting my medical degree at Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia in 1934. I completed an internship at Albany Hospital and spent the following year there as a resident physician in tuberculosis. On Saturday afternoon, July 6, 1935, I married my beautiful wife, Ruth Hodges King, the daughter of Dr. and Mrs. Earl H. King of Saratoga Springs. We moved up here to North Creek in 1936 when I began my practice as a family doctor. Ruth and I lived in the big fine house that Dr. Thomas Durant had built for himself and his family. Durant was a physician, businessman, and investor. He had accumulated 500,000 acres in the Adirondacks and owned the Adirondack Railroad. Maybe some of you remember hearing about Dr. Durant and the Gables. Our home was close to the center of town here in North Creek, just absolutely beautiful. We welcomed our first son that year also, James Alexander Glenn III. Such a big name for a little boy. He soon became Sandy to us. Well, the next 12 years were spent doctoring the folks all around this area. Those years included attending to many different situations. General practitioners back then covered everything. You name it. We were there for mothers giving birth, folks with influenza, children with the typical children diseases like mumps and measles and scarlet fever, accidents, and those folks who were at death's door. It was a busy time having office hours and going to homes to visit the folks who needed a doctor, and sometimes going to the scene of accidents. Filled most of my days. Still, I took the time to enjoy some of the things that this area has to offer, like fishing and hunting. I was even able to bag a buck or two over the years. Little time spent fishing does a lot for a man. I can't think of a better way to relax. I also enjoyed the fairly new sport of skiing. In 1939, there was interest in starting a business and professional men's group locally, so I became involved in that, along with Dr. Harrison Braley, Kenneth Swain, Warren Ratcliffe, James O'Keefe, and Adam L. Sitterly, who was vice president of the North Creek National Bank. There were over 40 reservations for that first meeting of the Civic Association, so you can see that there was quite a lot of interest in it. I continued to be a part of the group all the while we lived here. In the summer of 1939, a committee consisting of William Shields, Downing Braley, Dr. Fitzgerald, Charles Sullivan, Frank Hooper, Archley Freeburn, and myself was appointed to lay the groundwork and arrange the financial means to organize a Boy Scout troop in town. I enjoyed my involvement in scouting for the rest of my life. I eventually became a director at large of the Mohegan Council Boy Scouts of America. Many good things were started that year, but the year ended with such sadness and heartbreak. You see, I was summoned to a possible drowning. It was our little boy Sandy, who was only 3 years old. On that cold December day, he had chased a ball out on the ice at the edge of the river. He'd been playing with some other boys from the neighborhood near Waddell's store. Those boys notified their father's employee, who turned in the alarm. My wife waded into the river, not caring that the ice was cutting her legs, and beat away the ice with her bare hands to get to Sandy. They carried him to shore. The neighbors and I worked for 3 years to revive him, but we couldn't. They even brought resuscitation equipment from Warrensburg and Chestertown, but it was too late. Sandy was laid to rest here in this spot on the day before Christmas in 1939, one of the saddest days of our lives. Early the next year, the American Legion bought a new resuscitator and inhaler for the community. I gave instruction on the use of the resuscitator to 4 of their members who had completed the American Red Cross First Aid course. In turn, they gave instruction for its use to others who wanted to learn. Hopefully it would prevent further tragedy in cases of complete asphyxiation. In the 1930s, the area became well known as a skiing destination. People would come by train, bus, and car to try out the new trails at the North Creek Ski Bowl. Folks around here rented out their spare rooms to accommodate some of the skiers. We enjoyed the new sport also. Yes, we did, and continued to enjoy it for many years, coming back to ski and see our friends here even after we moved away. The Gore Mountain Ski Patrol was formed in 1935. It was one of the oldest in the East. The Gore Mountain Ski Club, in conjunction with the Ski Patrol, saw the need for safety features to be implemented. In 1941, Wilson Heseltine and I were appointed to investigate ski patrol equipment and see that all was ready for the coming winter. I was able to provide 8 fracture boxes for the ski patrol to use. These are hinged affairs used particularly for ankle injuries. Padded with a pillow, they were easily adjusted and quite rigid, serving as a splint while a patient was being transported. There's one of these on display at the North Creek Depot Museum if you want to check it out. William Shields, the president of the ski club, supplied a number of basswood traction splints for arm injuries. Ralph Lincoln and Curtis Smith, 2 longtime patrol members, were working on perfecting a toboggan ambulance. I think it was about this time that my interests began to change, and I decided to go into radiology. Around 1945, I started 3 years of graduate work in X-ray at Harvard Medical School and Peter Bent Bridgham Hospital in Boston while I still had my practice here. Then I spent a year as assistant resident physician in radiology at Albany City Hospital and another year as senior assistant and chief resident in radiology at Peter Bent Bridgham Hospital. In 1950, I was resident in radiology at Pondville Hospital, Walpole, Massachusetts, staff assistant at Peter Bent Bridgham Hospital, and instructor in radiology at Harvard Medical School. Finally, in 1951, I was back in Glens Falls as an associate to Dr. Edgar Birdsall and working at Glens Falls Hospital in radiology until my retirement in 1968. During my career, I was vice president of the Northeastern New York Radiological Society, a member and past president of the Medical Society of the County of Warren, past director of the Northeastern New York Medical Service, a diplomat of the American Board of Radiologists, and a member of the Radiological Society of New York State. I also was a member of the Glens Falls Rotary Club, a deacon and an elder at the First Presbyterian Church, and a member of its Board of Christian Education, and a member of the Board of Directors of the American Cancer Society of New York. I guess you could say I led a full and satisfying life. It was nice to be close enough to North Creek to come back for a visit now and then. We'd come here to this beautiful spot on the hill to visit our sons Sandy and Paul, who we lost at such young ages. We also wanted our other 3 sons, Roger, David, and Randolph, to know the beauty of this area around North Creek. I can't think of a more beautiful place to spend eternity than this spot here, right near Gore Mountain, where we enjoyed skiing.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. Thank you for your service to our country and to our town. And may you and your family rest in peace here at the Union Cemetery. Turn right in here. This is the northern side of the cemetery, and we have honored several residents over on this side. Last year, we did a virtual graveyard walk, and that tour has been uploaded to the Gem Radio Theater Facebook page if you want to take a look at it. Here's Robert Sabattis. He was a soldier from town. And down here we have Joe Minder, who we honored last year with a wonderful, heartfelt story. Joe was a prisoner of war in World War II. And he came back to North Creek and lived out a very beautiful life. He was a beautiful soul. And his son Jack still lives here in North River. Okay, let's follow the lights up this hill. Mrs. Baruti is waiting for us. Good evening.
Good evening, fine people. My name is Bertha Cab Moses Baruti. I'm standing here on a hill surrounded by the Baruti Family Memorial Stone. I'm right over there by my dear husband Jabra. Our family members and descendants may also be found in other local graveyards as well as different parts of the world. There is a Solomon Baruti Family Cemetery on Bird Pond Road where some of our children may be found. But let me go back to the beginning of our story. I was born in Syria in 1888, as was my husband Jabra in 1872. Jabra's parents were Nicholas Nami Baruda and Amelia Jacobs, names which have been passed down to our descendants through the years. Jabra arrived in New York at Ellis Island in 1888 at the age of 16. He was sent to America by his parents to seek a better life away from religious conflict in our homeland. Jabra was a hard worker and determined to make a successful life in America. He had relatives who were peddlers by trade in those early days, and good at it too, filling their pack baskets and wagons with useful items and going door to door to sell them. That's how Jabra began his life in America. He made some money and returned to Syria, where we were married in 1904, when I was 16 years old. I came to America in 1907, along with 4 of Jabra's brothers, William, Paul, Moses, and George. Jabra and I had 10 children all, one who sadly died at birth. We Barudis are an industrious family by nature, and in America we continued the business of selling to people what they needed, mainly food and clothing. We lived in Glens Falls, Ticonderoga, Chester, and then settled in Johnsburg in 1919. Jabra purchased a Model T and began peddling wares and groceries in a circuit around the area, from North Creek to Indian Lake, Blue Mountain Lake, Long Lake, Newcomb, Minerva, and back to North Creek. We bought property on Main Street, where the shirt factory burned down in 1925, and built our first store, the Baruti Marketplace Fruit and Produce Market. Some of the lumber came from the old North Creek High School, which was torn down around that time. The market was extremely successful. Our family lived upstairs over the store until Jabra decided that living in town was not where the children should be raised. We purchased 500 acres on Bird Pond Road and lived in a large farmhouse there with 2 other Baruti families until the house burned down. After that, we stayed while the other 2 relatives found homes of their own. I was busy on the farm, raising 9 children in the Lord's way and keeping house. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22:6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your mother and father, which is the first commandment, with promise that it may be well with you, and you may live long on this earth. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Ephesians 6:1-4. We spoke our native tongue, Arabic, at home, but we all learned English. I made sure the children were raised proper. We were Seventh-day Adventists and kept the Sabbath faithfully. I would not even sew on a button until after dark on the Sabbath. When the stock market crashed in 1929, Jabra's success and generous nature inspired him to spur local business by adding more enterprises to North Creek. The Baruti family added the Happy Hour movie theater, a restaurant, a barbershop, a tavern, apartments, a motel, now known as the Alpine, along with the grocery store and the post office, all established and run by Barutis, and a testament to our work ethic and drive to succeed. Many people in Johnsburg today fondly remember going to Baruti's public market. run by our son Nicholas and his wife Esther, and Brother George's haberdashery and clothing store. Jabra even bought a small bowling pin factory in Riparius in 1948. There used to be a bowling alley in North Creek. Did you know that? Sadly, many of these buildings and businesses are no longer with us, but there's a small street in North Creek next to Marcia's restaurant named Baruti Lane, and the area around the grocery store in town will be forever known as Baruti Block to folks of a certain age and those who look fondly at the past. In fact, our granddaughter Tina Baruti lives in a house down at the end of Baruti Lane behind the Alpine Hotel. That makes me feel happy. And she named her son Moses, a fine family name for a Baruti descendant. Around me on this hill are many graves of Barutis who originally immigrated to America, came to the town of Johnsburg, settled here, raised their families, and shared the American dream that hard work can lead to success. Our descendants became successful business owners, entrepreneurs, doctors, dentists, teachers, authors, builders, soldiers who served our country during war, as well as parents and grandparents. Life goes by so fast, and a great many things happen along the way if you take notice of them. Sometimes, though, a successful business can take a wrong turn, or circumstances can change. Remember when I mentioned the generous Baruti nature? Well, that ran in the family. I have a metal box from back in those days. It's filled with handwritten credit slips from the old Baruti public market that was run by our son Nicholas and his wife Esther. Never let it be said that we Barutis didn't take care of our own brethren. There are credit slips amounting to over $1,000 for members of the Baruti family who came for groceries to feed their family and did not settle up. That can be forgiven. But the Spike Horn Club in 1969 charged $423.49 worth of food and did not pay the bill. If you see any of them, tell them there is a Baruti somewhere in America who could probably use that money. But I will leave you with verse. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and in good health, just as your soul prospers. 3 John 2. Good night to you all.
Thank you, Mrs. Baruti. Good night and rest in peace. Be careful as you come down this way. There's a step and solar lights leading the way down to the road that will take us right back to the Baptist church. Before we finish our tour, however, I would like to mention a couple that I referred to as the guardians of the Union Cemetery. They are Sharon and Ken Hammond. Sharon is descended from the Waldron family, and Ken served his country. They both serve our town and community by cleaning the stones and helping to maintain the cemetery, as well as holding church services for the small congregation that meet here in the First Baptist Church. Sharon and Ken truly represent the community spirit, and I believe the residents of the cemetery are as thankful for them as we are. Here we are back at the church. Thank you so much for coming to the Graveyard Walk, and good night to you all.